I'm Greg Sandow, and I'm sitting here with Fergus McWilliam, who is with the Berlin Philharmonic in what I understand to be a dual capacity. That is, you play the horn, and you also have an administrative position.
Yes.
This is correct.
This is correct, and I'm not the only one in that position. Quite a number of us, in addition to our musical and performing responsibilities, are also heavily involved in the self-direction of the orchestra and the various committees that we have in place to do that.
Okay, so this, from the point of view of an orchestral musician in America, is almost not to be believed. I mean, we understand that the Berlin Philharmonic is an orchestra run by musicians, but in the American orchestral world, this basically just doesn't happen, so people probably can't imagine what it's like. What is it like?
Well, the first question that most people will put to us, and quite understandably, is isn't it a lot of work? And the simple answer is yes. It requires a great deal of our time, in our free time. We don't generally get ourselves excused from any of our artistic responsibilities. We still have to play a full schedule of concerts and rehearsals and attend auditions and so forth. But we do our committee work in the free time in between. We are also, though, it's important to recognize that we do have a management. We have a fully staffed, a very large administrative and technical staff, numbering some 80 in all, because we run two concert halls. The Philharmonie, which is the big concert hall, and the smaller chamber music hall. Each keep not only our own productions going on in there, but when we're not performing, we rent out these spaces to other guest performances, other orchestras, chamber music ensembles, all sorts of productions. And it's part of our overall budget. And we have to run these buildings, we have to have staff to operate, to run these concerts and so forth. So there's quite a large administrative, technical and administrative side. There has to be, of course, a management associated with that in order to run the nuts and bolts of our operation.
So I guess the question then arises, what is the difference between the management musicians like yourself do and the management that the paid staff does? You said they do the nuts and bolts. Does that mean you do the leadership, the planning, the direction?
Yes, more in principle than in fact, because the time available to us is restricted. Therefore, we have learned how to delegate a lot of the authority which resides in the orchestra to make these decisions. We delegate them to professional management. Naturally, this professional management has a significant disadvantage. They have to look over their shoulders from time to time, wondering what the players are thinking of the things they're doing. To be quite honest,
I could add, you know, that in America, I imagine that the management looks over their shoulder, wondering what the musician's thinking of what they're doing and having no way to find out most of the time. So maybe
I don't think that's the case for that. I think our management learns very quickly how well they're doing. If they're perhaps too proactive, they'll hear about it, and if they're also too reactive or too passive, they'll hear about it. But should a position be unfilled, and a case in point has just recently been applicable. For the last 3 years, we have not had a general manager, a CEO. We call it an Intendant in Germany. And we've been looking for 3 years. Some of you may know that we've very successfully recently discovered and engaged, to our great delight, Mrs. Pamela Rosenberg.
Right. And former director of the San Francisco Opera, but before that of opera companies in Germany.
That's right. And for all this entire period, we've been running without a CEO. So not much point delegating work to a CEO when you haven't got one.
This is the truth.
So we've been doing that work ourselves.
So describe then what exactly it is that you do and how you happen to end up holding this position. Were you elected to it? Did you volunteer for it? A combination of both?
I was elected to, first of all, be a member of what is called the Personal Committee. The Personal Committee, or Workers' Council, is a committee that's mandated in Germany for every place of employment. It's almost unique in the world, I think. It's a model that the other European nations are beginning to follow. It's seen as quite radical by the Anglo-American business world and as quite essential in the Germanic one. This committee is made up of representatives of all the employees, not just musicians, also from the administration. And we have an extraordinary amount of authority to interject ourselves into management decisions. to block and prevent certain issues from actually coming about if we feel that either labour law hasn't been followed, or where the interests of the employees have not been accorded due respect, or to protect individuals in their contractual relationships. We look after issues revolving around worker safety. It begins to sound in the Anglo-American model a little bit like a union. Well, we're not in fact the union at all. We're simply, like every other place of employment with over 50 employees, the mandated committee has to exist. No one can be employed without the approval of this committee. No decision can be made like firing somebody without the approval of this committee. On the other hand, the committee sometimes has to involve itself on the management side, taking a position against a possible employee. So that it's a bit of like a Solomon's committee all the time.
I guess a question that might arise is, does every orchestra then in Germany over a certain size run the same way, or is there something that sets the Berlin Philharmonic apart?
Well, this particular committee is not unique to Berlin Philharmonic. It's a standard across the entire nation. To describe the end of my role is that as chairman of this committee, then I sit on the board of trustees of our foundation. That's mandated by the law that says that whoever the chairman of this workers' council is, they sit de facto on the board of trustees, the fiduciary board, with a vote as well. And that's the large part of my committee work, the largest part. Other things I've been involved with, though, is chairing up the negotiating committee for master agreements. I was on the search committee for the new Intendant. I sit on another board of trustees for a subsidiary that our foundation has, and a few other things I can't remember.
They're hard to keep track of.
Ask my wife; she knows where when I'm not at home.
But now, what sets the Berlin Philharmonic apart from other orchestras in Germany?
Oh, I think we have a lot in common with other orchestras in Germany. It's a good question, whether we're more different and more similar. I would say we're more similar.
Well, maybe the similarities, maybe the most important thing are the differences between what you do and what orchestras here in America do.
They were getting closer.
There we're getting closer.
It might be in the German context, the difference between the Berlin Philharmonic and another orchestra in Germany might be a matter of degree, a degree of intensity, if you will. But the underlying structural elements are in some way or other common. You can find them in most of the other German orchestras, perhaps not as fully developed as they are with us. Also, we've been at this since 1882 in various legal structures. We had to adapt all the time to changing external political environments, and always found a way to survive. But the essential element of the orchestra's foundation in 1882 was an act of rebellion. In 1882, the members of a private orchestra run by a guy called Bilse, basically, rather than having a strike, they just resigned, they just quit to found their own band. And it was for commercial reasons and for artistic reasons. They wanted to be able to play better or have better conductors, and they wanted to make more money. They thought they could do that better running the place themselves. And you know what? They were right. Mm-hmm. They did.
And even to this day, one of the things that certainly sets you apart from any American orchestra I know of is that you, all the musicians, choose the music director.
Yes, well, this is where we get to the bigger differences between our model and particularly the Anglo-American one. As I remember, the United States, it was the board who chose the music director, following the old analogy, whoever's paying the piper calls the tunes. Certain logic to it, of course, who could argue that? Except where we are, somebody else is paying the piper and we call the tunes. It's a lovely paradox.
Well, the someone else who pays the piper is the German government, traditionally, or the Berlin city government.
Berlin is a city-state and enjoys a double status as a municipality and as a state within a federal structure like in the United States. It has state authorities and state taxing powers and so forth. They do pay a significant part of our budget, and something over 40%, near 45% of our entire budget. Currently, we are re-earning or recovering. We can refinance our own budget up to 60% through ticket sales, touring, and so forth.
Yeah. So, what is it like picking a music director? I imagine that there are musicians here in America who would kill for that privilege, or some who might think, "Oh my God, we couldn't trust ourselves. We would all disagree with each other. We would fight."
Yes, it's all of that. I was in Detroit in the years 1979 to 82, and the era with Antal Dorati was coming to an end, and they were looking to the future, and it was a very dramatic and very revolutionary moment in American orchestral history back then, when Detroit worked out a formula whereby they could actually take an active part in the choosing of the next director. It was a very arcane system of doing things, but it was a paragraph, a wordage in the master agreement, which was accepted for a while, and gave them a really significant say in the matter. I gather, I'm not sure, you'll have to check me on this later, but I gather they've since lost or given up this particular influential voice for reasons I can't comment on. I was long since gone. I also have heard that there's been more and more involvement on the part of the American musicians in recent years on the issue of choosing conductors.
Well, this is true and really on all aspects of orchestra management. American musicians have gotten more involved. But I don't think there's any major American orchestra, I know that there's no major American orchestra, that takes it to the point that you have in Berlin, where the musicians simply are the voice of last resort here. You all make the choice.
Yes, it's a little bit like a papal election, where people, or the press, they're all camped outside, everyone's waiting, watching to see what happens, looking for white smoke. And
the whole world was last time. I remember vividly how we all
after Karajan and after Abado, particularly with the post-Karajan election, that was quite extraordinary. We were locked up in a villa, basically locked up, windows and doors shut, telephone lines.
And you mean,
capped.
when you say locked up, you mean every single one of you?
We were taken there by buses, and we were locked in, and had no telephones. They were all capped. No one could, we had a primitive, in those old days, a radio telephone. That was the only way we'd be able to communicate the result at the end of our deliberations. We had no idea how long we were going to be there. We brought in food and drink. We could have been there all night. We didn't know. But it went all day.
All night or all week? Does all week
No one
happen?
knew. No one knew, because no one had experienced
Nobody had done it for a very long time.
years.
Yeah.
A whole generation had come and gone in the orchestra without ever having exercised its...
So now does the analogy with the College of Cardinals go so far that you can't talk about what happens?
Precisely.
Oh, well, then I suppose all of our lips are sealed. But in general, what is it like? Is it collegial? Is it angry? I'm sure all of the above is likely to be the answer.
No, it's actually nothing like an emotional thing. It's extremely, the German word sachlich, it means very, very objective and very detailed. In the election for Claudio Abbado back then, we decided to make a rule that everyone had to stand and speak. That even if you had a very minor opinion, or you were trying to shun the spotlight, you would be required to stand and say something. I think we were limited to 5 minutes. You were not required to speak for 5 minutes, but you had a limit, and you could not speak a second time until every single member of the orchestra had been through it once. Just to give you a little bit of human interest. But basically, it's a very thorough, very cool, very, very objective, and very it's a very important decision. And emotion plays only a part in as much as one wants to include the emotional component in music making, but not a decision based on an emotional setting.
And do you talk about very mundanely, very vulgarly, business factors, who is going to be the best visible face of the orchestra? Or is it largely about music making, a combination of both?
It would be disingenuous of me to say no to the first. But very, very little is actually a decision. Both these decisions for Claudio Abbado and for Simon Rattle 12 years later, neither of the decisions were made for prurient business reasons like the record sale and so on. The press, of course, played it up hugely and assumed that it was, and they were trying actually to exercise their own influence over us on that area. But in the end, I'm very proud to say about my fellow colleagues in our orchestra, the decision was made each time based on that which we felt to be the best for the orchestra and for music.
And does there need to be a vote of a certain majority, a 2/3 majority? How would it work? How do you know when you're done?
In advance, each time we set up the ground rules slightly differently. And I honestly cannot remember which was what, when. But it had to be, obviously for such a decision of such importance, the end result has to be with a fairly considerable majority, not just a simple majority.
Mm-hmm. And then the music director is your employee?
Oh, you want to get really confusing now?
I do.
As a member of the Board of Trustees, the music director works for me. Mm-hmm. We sign off on his contract.
Mm-hmm.
as does the intendant, work for us.
And the members of the Board of Trustees are all musicians?
Some, only some.
What proportion?
There's 2 of us out of 7.
Ah.
But as a musician, I'm employed by the intendant. So it gets very confusing.
I do want to observe, since there's talk about the Anglo-American model and the German model, that we American types in the Anglo-American relationship pride ourselves on our notion of democracy, but in fact we're very strong believers in hierarchy, aren't we? And we feel that there needs to be somebody who clearly is the person who holds the power in any situation. And we would stereotype Germans as being that way and not being very collegial. So apparently the stereotype is not
seems to be in the orchestral world
true.
quite the other way around.
Yeah. And so what are the practical consequences for music making? Do you feel more collegial with the music director than
Not necessarily,
you would?
but what it does, and this is the critical, I would say the most important decision that a member of our orchestra is entrusted with, is another one, and that is the choice of the musicians in the orchestra themselves. The audition procedure with us is run whereby there are no screens, no attempt is made to be fair in that respect. Mm-hmm. We want to see everything and learn everything we possibly can about the candidate. And the orchestra as a whole sits in the audience and listens to the entire audition and votes. And it's a simple majority vote of the entire orchestra. If the music director chooses to attend, he's accorded 1 vote like everyone else. But doesn't have to attend and has no particular authority or rights attendant with that. That process is for us the most critical to the understanding of what our image of ourselves is and how the organization is run. We choose our own players. Close on second place comes the choice of music director. Same kind of procedure, again a democratic decision made by the entire orchestra, but not in the end quite as important as the players, because quite simply a conductor is there for a few years or many years. The players I'm with for the rest of my life. One of the cynical jokes we make is it's easier to divorce yourself from your wife than from your colleagues.
Yes.
So you are entering a relationship as intimate and as long-lasting and as full of commitment on both sides as a marriage every time we take any.
And one where the commitment has to be taken seriously, and you don't want to enter it with somebody that you don't really know well.
Precisely.
So I understand that this vote by a simple majority up or down is only the beginning of what can be a very long process.
That's just at the audition level.
Yes.
Then we enter the probationary period of 2 years, at the end of which the successful candidate has to win a 2/3 majority in secret ballot at the orchestra parliament. Just by the nature of numbers and statistics, to get 2/3 majority in any decision is an overwhelming vote of confidence, and that's what we require. We require an overwhelming vote of confidence in order to be accorded lifetime membership in the Berlin Philharmonic.
And how do you as a horn player feel, let's say, voting for a section viola player? Do you feel that you really have a handle on how they play?
Obviously, particularly at the tenure issue, I'm at a disadvantage because I don't get to hear them very often playing by themselves. Therefore, I'm very dependent on the expert opinion of the group in question. In this case, it would be the viola group. On the other hand, we go to great lengths during the probationary period to get to know the individuals personally. Might go out for a drink with one of them or have dinner sometime, find out who they are. Talk to the colleagues too and find out how they're reacting. Watch the dynamics and see if there's antagonism there that might have nothing to do with what the musicianship is about. There may be something else going on. So that, oddly enough, there's a leveling influence provided by the large majority of players who are not in the affected group. And the affected group has got a responsibility to convince the rest of their choice, one way or the other. It's hard to understand unless you've been there. And we're not always correct. But at the audition level, but we are almost invariably correct at the tenure level.
Yeah, because by that time you have information.
Yeah.
And I suppose that people who have not worked in such an environment would only imagine trouble, that you'd be at each other's throats, that somebody would be so controversial that they would divide the orchestra. But I think what I'm getting from you is that the Berlin Philharmonic has sort of an organizational culture in which you move away from things like that. You don't want division, you don't want controversy, you want constructive work together.
Controversy can be productive.
Yeah.
Confrontation on issues can be productive. We are more concerned that our organization, our ensemble, this institution which we've been entrusted with by our forefathers in the orchestra, we will have to pound a hand on again to those who come after us, that we have a fiduciary responsibility and an artistic responsibility to preserve, maintain, strengthen, and enhance the orchestra known as the Berlin Philharmonic. Complacency can be just as fatal as arbitrary hostility. Each individual situation will have a different kind of climate surrounding it. But the key thing is to keep the goal in mind. What are we trying to achieve here? What are the important issues? Are we arguing about something here where the argument itself could prove to be healthy for the organization, or is it destructive? And if it's destructive, then of course let's get off it.
And somebody listening to this might say, well, Fergus is clearly a balanced, sober sort who can see all sides. This may surprise you, might surprise your wife, but somebody listening to you now might think that. But then they would say, again, with this suspicion that I think a lot of Americans have about situations that work cooperatively, they would say, but surely there are some people in the orchestra who are completely unreasonable, and nobody can talk to them and nobody can work with them. And this organizational culture that's being described here, it can't really extend to everybody, can it?
Why not? Yes, we do, and there have been on occasion difficult individuals, even reasonable individuals who become difficult, or they could be having a bad day. But it's a little bit like a family. You know, you have to put up with each other. You have to find a way to get around it and move on to the next day. You can't let it become a situation where the tail is wagging the dog, where a single one or a handful of individuals become so obstreperous that we decide to sacrifice the whole structure and all our goals just to deal with the few bad apples. The key, these two fundamental key elements to begin with, the choice of our own players and the choice of our music director, means that the ultimate and primary authority for the artistic responsibility, the artistic future of the orchestra resides in the membership of the orchestra, in the musicians, yeah. And everything else derives from that. Therefore, the empowerment of the musicians is paramount. That means once you've been empowered, and you have empowered yourself, you are now bearing an enormous responsibility. You have authority, which comes with empowerment. You also have responsibility. And everybody loves the authority. You know, it's fun to be able to throw your weight around, but very few people actually enjoy the responsibility which comes with it. That's one of the things we're looking for in players when we test them out in the probationary period. We assume they know how to play their instruments. We heard that at the audition. We assume they're great musicians. We've heard that. We know that. We want to find out, are their shoulders broad enough and the legs strong enough to carry this institution for the length of their time in their 30 or 40 years in the orchestra, to be active stakeholding participants in this operation.
And does it make you, as an ensemble, play better?
Indisputably.
Mm-hmm.
We take more risks, we have more fun, we stretch further, we dig deeper, we have more, we enjoy more passion, more viscerality, more emotion, we go flat out, we have a ball.
And why are you able to take more risks? Talk about that a bit. Because you trust each other more, because you know what baseline you're coming back to, or just because... All of that,
but we're probably wired that way to begin with. There's probably something wrong with our brains.
And that's probably who you're looking for also.
Yes, people given the choice of two ways of doing the same thing, a typical philharmonic will take the more dangerous way, just for fun.
Can you give an example from some actual piece of somebody taking a risk?
Well, this would be for horn players in the audience if they're listening. We don't use descant horns, which, sensible horn players would use a descant horn to make life a little more accurate, fewer chances of busting a note. And we are a little bit intimidated by the descant horn. For us looks like we're having to use a crutch, and then thinking, oh my God, I'll become dependent on the crutch. Oh no, I'm going to go at this straight at the bull, straight at it, and we get away with it.
Does it mean that, for example, principal players will take some extravagant phrasings that they might have not risked in another orchestra?
Oh, I'm sure they would have done it in another orchestra too. Phrasing altogether in our band is a hotly debated issue. I mean, we're constantly, if people have been watching our rehearsals, they often wonder, what a racket that goes on. The conductor stops conducting for a second, and immediately pandemonium breaks out.
Wait a minute, pandemonium in which you're talking to each other about the way you play?
Playing and fiddling around, and the conductor's trying to make himself...
Wait. Are you talking to each other about the way you play?
Yes, yeah.
Because this is also not too well known, to put it mildly, in America.
No, well, you see, we have another one of our commandments is mutual criticism is not only tolerated, it's almost required.
To give it. So if you hear the piccolo player playing something that you don't think quite cuts it, what do you do?
You tell them.
You tell them at the rehearsal, in front of everybody else, privately, all of the above?
Any of those.
Any
you
of
have
those.
to choose your moment, choose your weapon, choose your choice of words, and it would be reckless, perhaps, to be unnecessarily abrasive and to do that in the wrong environment. But a little bit of diplomacy, but a firm opinion too.
And I suppose it also depends on what the nature of the problem you're talking about is.
Of course, yeah.
Well, give an example of somebody who said something about you.
Play that longer and give it a crescendo. You don't disappear.
And this is not the conductor saying
It's be the
that.
horn player beside me. And it wouldn't be the first horn player, it would be the guy behind me. And my response was, "You're right, but I was just saving myself." He said, "Well, fine, but I needed to have you push there. I didn't know what was happening. You were missing."
I think you should say which horn you sit in. Which
I was sitting at that time on second.
Second. Okay.
I think.
And so the third horn might say to you,
I
need you...
I think it was sixth behind me.
Okay, sixth.
Yeah. Somebody over
a
my
big
shoulder.
piece, okay. Yeah. So they say, I need you to do more here.
Yes.
And this doesn't go through the conductor, and it's not something you whisper
No.
later on. It's just something that comes up in rehearsals.
Fiddle players are always, at the back of the section, they're always offering better bowing suggestions than the concertmaster.
And so it's very clear why you need such a long process of getting tenure, because you need people who are going to thrive in this environment and fit and be helpful.
Yes, we have to be very active.
Now, do you get fiddle players talking to you about the way you play, or talking to the principal horn?
Less so. You'll find section principals commuting that way to each other. One of the classic ones is something from the fiddle section up front saying, "Horns, you're dragging, you're late." And we're saying, "You're rushing." Yeah.
And how is that settled?
Diplomatically.
Yes, but I suppose one of the things is you do it again and you try to stay together, and perhaps you can stay together without having to be
just the very
resolved.
fact of having mentioned it, you'll find the fiddles are not running as much as they were, and we do play a little quicker, and guess what? We do meet in the middle.
And so then what's the role of the conductor when a dispute like that comes up, when a situation like that comes up?
Referee at a football match.
And only to be invoked when necessary, I gather.
Somebody as diplomatic as Simon Rattle knows precisely when to jump in and actually correct the situation, say, "Actually, horns, you are late, and the strings are not running." Or say, "Sorry, gentlemen and ladies, you know what, the horns are right, to my ear."
But also not only diplomatic enough, but smart enough to know that you are going to make him sound much better than most orchestras could.
Well said.
You pick all the conductors who conduct for you.
Indirectly, yes. Directly, no. The time it would take to sit down and make a list of the conductors we'd like to see next season, and call their agents, and negotiate with them, and see who can do what, and see who can do what, when, and so forth, simply is too much.
Right.
We have somebody whose main job is actually to do all that work. However, the intendant, the CEO, the general manager, is somebody who's entrusted with, in the primary sense, of making the first stab at next year's season or the future season's planning. And that's done in a general committee with the music director himself. The intendant also works on that, and our two orchestra representatives in the executive committee. We'll thrash out the bones of a season with the availability, based on availability, based on programming themes and directions we want to go. And at some point when it's fairly well advanced, it's presented to the orchestra. If we really get our backs up and decide that we don't like the direction things are going, then it'll be raised in an orchestra meeting.
Does that mean you might veto a particular or raise questions about a particular choice of conductor?
Yes.
Yes. And it must happen from time to time that you find yourself with a conductor up there on the podium who is not what you would like a conductor to be. What then happens? It is unfortunately common, and you know this very well, I'm sure, among American orchestras, to, under that circumstance, perhaps not play well because you just don't feel motivated, or to refuse to play well because you feel insulted or aggrieved.
Yes. We can't afford that. We have to sound good all the time.
Well, you could make the same point, as anybody listening to me here, about American orchestras, which can't afford to sound bad, but you really take this seriously.
Not only do we take it, I mean, I recommend that for everybody. Making yourself deliberately sound anything less than 100% is shooting yourself right in the head.
And especially, you might say, in a circumstance as now, where the future of orchestras is called into question.
You can't go with your cap out asking for money without delivering an absolute gold standard product in the first place. And anything
so
at all.
So then what do you all do when you find yourself under the control of a conductor who is not what you would like?
We save the concert.
You save the concert.
We save his ass.
Mm-hmm.
And then we, very quickly after the concert, when he's gone on his way, make sure he doesn't come back.
Mm-hmm. But you play as well as you possibly can under the circumstances.
Absolutely. And it's much harder.
And it's much harder, of course it is. Of course it is. What happens if a conductor wants to do something musically that all of you are not certain about?
Then it's again a bit of giving in. You see, a guest conductor in our situation it's a rare guest conductor who insists on a way of playing or an idea which we won't accept. They're just simply, most of them, too clever to run straight onto an open knife, or trying to have a confrontation with our orchestra on issues like that. Once that we've established a trusting relationship with our favorite conductors, then we're much more open and predisposed to entertain their ideas, even if we think they're, oh, dear old friend, I mean, we love what you do, but today that's a cracked idea, I tell you, but well, we'll try it for once just to see. We'll be much more flexible in that way. But with an unknown conductor, a hitherto unknown conductor for us, or a younger fellow, or now increasingly there's some women now conducting and getting to the big podiums of the world, it's far more an issue of whether we can understand what they want, whether we hold it to be valid or not, and if it is an invalid concept or a suicidal concept or whatever, then sometimes in performance we will simply bend it the other way and do it in a way that is more conducive to our style, more representative of our traditions and style, and will actually prevent that conductor from landing on the hard floor without a net. We'll spin a security net under them.
And then are there also discussions at rehearsal? A conductor says, here I would like an extraordinarily strong ritardando here, something greater than you may ever have played before, and you all say, but we don't see the need for that, we're not comfortable. No, that may be an extreme example.
I understand. We're more open-minded than that. We would try these things out and then say, well, if that crazy idea in the audience is torn apart by the critics later, we say, well, that was his idea, not ours.
Or would you say that in public? Would you let that be known?
I think we don't have to.
Yeah, because people would assume it was the conductor.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have a cooperative system in rehearsals where one of you may suggest an interpretive idea that had not come up yet?
Very much so. Balancing issues, saying, I'm sorry, I don't want to play this more than this level of piano, and I have a feeling I'm not coming through because, sorry, I feel my colleagues are all too loud. The music director or the conductor at the time might say, all right, in deference to the soloist at that point, everyone just back off.
Sure, but something on a little bit of a larger musical level, let's say, although still kind of elementary, the climax is not coming in the right place here.
Oh, that's a structural issue which is usually fairly clear to everybody. Mm-hmm. Although there can be, I think of a case in point that is relevant on our tour right now. There's a work on for one of the concerts coming up here at Carnegie Hall. We're doing the Gran Partita for winds, so the big wind serenade from Mozart. And there is an open issue in one of the phrases of whether the emphasis comes at the beginning of the bar or the middle of the bar. Where does it peak? And in this case, we were among ourselves. We were not unified, and Simon Rattle was asked. And he said, well, if you want my opinion, it's the middle of the bar. Mm-hmm. And so we do it in the middle of the bar. That was a case where we weren't able to convince ourselves, in fact.
Right, and he served as the referee.
Yeah, he's actually standing out in front conducting the piece too, which is very unusual. It's only 13 players.
Really? And so sometimes it might happen that you suggest something that the conductor, him or herself, had never heard of.
Yes, and then we get into conference together. He will sit down with any one or all of the players involved and simply argue or discuss. And he'll give his reasons for why and his research and so forth. And in a case like Simon Rattle, he has done so much preparation. His reasons for everything he does are really very profound and very convincing.
And of course you knew that before you voted for him to be the music director.
Yes.
Because you had some experience with him. So now let me throw you a tremendous softball question. You like this, the way it works out musically. You get a lot of satisfaction from it.
Does softball mean yes?
Softball means that ought to be an easy question to answer.
Yeah. It is an easy question, and the answer is yes. I pinch myself in every concert after 20 years. I still can't believe I'm having as much fun as I am.
This, I suppose I'm maybe not supposed to editorialize my position here, but I think it should be obvious to people from the American orchestra world who may be watching this that this is not the kind of thing that American orchestra musicians say to themselves after every concert. It is unfortunately not.
I remember that, yes.
You remember that because you were here.
Yeah, that's why I left.
Turning to a different kind of question. Does the Berlin Philharmonic feel itself threatened by the forces that are affecting classical music apparently worldwide, diminishing audience, increasing difficulty of finding financial support, aging audience?
Threatened is a word I find a bit too draconian, but responding to, yes, we are, like everyone else, concerned about the shifting tectonic plates. We are fully cognizant of our very privileged position. We are uniquely in the world enjoying a level of financial support and security that almost no other orchestra in the world enjoys. We have a brand name, value and impact which is rivaled only by the Vienna Philharmonic. So we have extreme advantages compared with all the other orchestras in the world. And we are very cognizant of that and very, very grateful for it. But nonetheless, enjoying this privileged position as we do, we are nonetheless concerned that we want to maintain that position as long and as far as possible, which means we have to look at exactly the same elements that are moving around and are so threatening, particularly in America, to so many of our American colleagues.
I would say that threatened is an accurate word for many situations here in the United States, that people can see the handwriting on the wall. They can project financial and ticket sales trends into the future and see themselves in a particularly bad place, for example, as measured by a continually increasing deficit. But I gather that this is not the case with you all?
Oh, yes. Again, Berlin, we've got a balanced budget. We are doing very well. In fact, we've managed to increase our revenues for the time being. May that continue. But the hitherto guarantee of public subsidy from the government, which is actually mandated by the Constitution, has been in place for roughly 50 years, since the founding of the German Federal Republic in 1949. But the orchestras were established under this Constitution in 1952. And for basically half a century, no one's really had to worry about their funding very much. Then suddenly, with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the complete restructuring of the German nation and economy, the western part of Germany is now having to basically rebuild the east entirely. Massive capital shifts running into the astronomical figures. I think gazillions would be the amount. And this is putting an enormous strain on the economy, which is many people are aware of internationally. And as a result, a lot of the sacred cows have come into question. One of the things is that culture is no longer a given, that it's the sacred cow that you cannot even discuss. It's got to be always there. Now suddenly it's at disposition. The arts, let's see, do they have to be so expensive? Can they be made more cost efficient? Or do we actually need 3 opera houses in Berlin? This sort of discussion. And the threat has resulted in the German context with a loss of, I believe, or the fusion of 40 orchestras. I believe that's the number.
40 out of how many?
Out of 150 or so. So that's a fairly huge whack.
It really is, and nothing comparable has taken place here, interestingly enough.
Not yet, maybe.
No, not yet. It's true.
We were overpopulated with orchestras. I mean, you could make that argument. And I'm saying this as an orchestral player. With the fusion of the two countries, the unification of East and West Germany, each had an enormous number of orchestras. Every tiny community had a little orchestra or an opera house or something, which is a feature of the tradition of our musical culture in Germany going back 200-300 years. But with the one government and the one nation now, you had in many cases doubles. You had East and West Berlin coming together, and they each had, there was 2 operas in one, and there was 6 orchestras, and everything was double in Berlin. One for the East and one for the West. And then when they became one city, the government was faced with a hell of a problem.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile that?
I think actually an advantage we have in America is that it's not the government's problem. And, every city of any size, including very small ones, have an orchestra of some sort, but these are private organizations, so nobody can shut them down. And if they find a way to operate, they operate. But now, are you finding that your ticket sales are declining? This is a fact in many large American orchestras.
We are, again, lucky. Again, I wouldn't use the Berlin Philharmonic as a bellwether here, because we run at capacity all the time. I mean, we're basically sold out.
Really?
Yeah.
And is it people from Berlin buying tickets or visitors?
Also visitors.
Everybody.
A huge, we have ticket sales that you can do online at box office and various other ways of getting them, and it's a fight. The minute midnight hits on the day of the first day of sale, we're often sold for 30 minutes.
But that is fascinating because, I'll give you two examples. The Cleveland Orchestra, which many people would say is our flagship orchestra in America, the people would say the best, whatever that may mean, but people will say it. And one that has achieved a great deal of support in its native city over the past generation. They are hemorrhaging sales at the box office now, and I have seen projections which show that the sales to their established ticket buyers are going down, and they have to find new people to buy tickets in order to exist. Okay, cut to New York, the New York Philharmonic, which is in a position to benefit from people who visit New York.
Yeah.
In a way that orchestras in other cities are perhaps not. And they're doing better this year than previously due to some very sharp marketing, but generally over the years recently they have been hurting. So somehow this does not happen.
Well, it sounds to me like we have some of the same advantages of New York. We're an international orchestra. We're in an international city with a huge number of people coming as tourists, cultural tourists. We can draw from all sorts of possible audiences. But that doesn't mean we're invulnerable. The traditional audience for the traditional repertoire is dying off, there's no question of that. And we've been making moves recently to try to establish channels to and contact with audiences for the future.
What are some of those?
We've started with something that we call our education or outreach project, something that a lot of people thought was inconceivable for the Berlin Philharmonic, and some actually, not members of the orchestra, some of our audience and some of the environment, the people in the society, were upset that we came down from our ivory tower, our exclusivity, and went out to work in schools in poorer parts of the city of Berlin, and doing work, more like social work, in the city. They said that's not what the Berlin Philharmonic is there for. I want my Philharmoniker to be some kind of superstar and not a social worker in the slums. We have about 60% of the orchestra now, I'd say, has now become involved. 60 to 70% are actively involved in these outreach programs. We have all developed a real passion for it. It came as a big surprise to us.
I suspect you enjoy it very much once you go and do it.
Tremendously fulfilling, fantastically fulfilling, and leaves you with a multifaceted sense of well-being afterwards. One, you feel as good as a mensch. Two, you see, working with young people reminds you of yourself when you were a young person. You fell in love with music, or you were first introduced to music. To see kids who have never heard of classical music, who come from a completely different culture, see the look in their eyes as they start to discover for the very first time what it tastes like. Also the issue of empowerment. We work very carefully with helping these kids discover that they are entitled to, they have the right to create something. Not just to sit there passively and learn what you're told. Sit there, be quiet and learn what you're told. But to say, who are you? I'd like to know who you are and what you can do. And show me, and how can I help you make something happen musically? Improvisation workshops and composition workshops and things like that. For kids who've never done music. Never held an instrument in their hands, don't know what Beethoven is, classical music. They don't even know the name classical music. And we've brought them into the Philharmonic. And whether they turn around in 20 or 30 years and buy a ticket, we do not know. But we certainly feel that we are in touch with our community to a degree and extent we have never been before. And that has to be good. And
you really don't know where things like that are going to go. It really is not a straight line. You nourish these kids musically and later on they buy tickets.
Have we got time for this? Because this is a really big subject. It's a big subject which I think affects all American orchestras. Put briefly, we have contact we've been working in Venezuela with the Venezuelan Youth Project, Youth Orchestra Music Project, which is 30 years old and predates Chavez and all the other presidents. It goes way back. They've been phenomenally successful, unbelievably successful. 250,000 children every year are involved in this program. and are basically taken off the streets. These are street kids, you know. They're taken out of crime and out of drug use and out of family abuse, and they're taken out of the slums. They're given musical instruments, stuck in a little orchestra, and encouraged just to live together with their fellow kids. Kids there normally are frightened and afraid of. So the poverty cycle, the crime, and the fear cycle are broken through by the use of classical, Western, symphony orchestra music. This project is something we're all beginning to learn from. We're using the techniques in Berlin. There will soon be a project in Scotland doing the same thing. People are copying all over the place. The New England Conservatory is now involved down there. And if American orchestras and their boards would like to try something, I would highly recommend this. The idea of going and doing school concerts, not so much to try and win audiences for the future, or to look good to your sponsors in order to raise money that way, as an image issue, but frankly, to be one of the most powerful social engineering projects you could possibly find. The most effective one I've ever seen on the planet. And it's done by the only people who can do it. The only ones who can do it are symphony orchestra players.
We should make a note that this is an entirely separate discussion.
Yeah.
That with you or somebody should be the subject of one of these interviews by itself, because it really is profound. And I would like to suggest, my theory anyway, that if you ask what the benefit is to the orchestra, it's wrong to look at it as a linear thing. Oh, if we do this, it will then translate in a way that we understand into more ticket sales in the future. What it does is begin to transform the kind of institution that an orchestra is and what its relationship is to the society around it in ways whose result cannot be foreseen, but may build, certainly going to be something that builds the kind of future we would all like to see, and we don't know what that is.
That's, as I said, it's a huge subject, and it's vital that it be addressed, and this is perhaps not the right venue for it, but
it's a subject that this venue should address. Thank you very much, Fergus. I get the feeling that we only scratched the surface of many things, and that if we had the chance to go on for another 3 hours, there's no telling what might come up.
There's no end to it. Thank you for having me.